The Game of Zen explores the often overlooked ways in which professional, personal, and spiritual growth are interrelated. We dive deep into the life teachings of the Buddha and the mindfulness practices of Zen, revealing how they can help us dramatically expand our possibilities for wholehearted work, life, and play.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Game of Zen podcast. This is Scott here, checking in from Philadelphia, PA. As usual, I'm with my good friend and Zen master, Paul. How's it going today?
It's going really good. Good to be here, Scott, and good to see you, Bruce.
Pleasure.
So we're excited for a very special guest today. My friend Bruce Eckfeldt is here with us today. Thank you very much for showing up, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah. So Bruce, who I've known for several years, met originally through the cannabis space. He's a strategic leadership coach, a podcast host. He's got a retreat business called Wilder Retreats, where he's a facilitator for executive leaders. He's a founder and CEO of an Inc. 500 company. And he's a huge outdoor enthusiast, and he's been climbing mountains and doing things since he was a wee lad. So, Bruce, thanks again, and love to hear more about your background and tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure, Scott, and thanks, Paul, for having me on. So I'm excited for this. I mean, I've had this long history of business, but then also kind of outdoor adventure, outdoor sports. I grew up in Minnesota, right, which kind of, puts you in the thick of various kind of outdoors activities, whether it's I was skiing, I was actually biathlon, I was rowing, I was a cyclist, and just developed a love of the outdoors from an early age. I grew up going to the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota for the summers and doing camp and everything. And then, life kind of progressed, and I was in Montreal for a while, did a couple of degrees in architecture, and then got into software, founded my tech company. And throughout that, always kind of found ways of getting outside and getting into the outdoors. And then the last 10 years, I've really kind of focused, after I sold my company, I've really focused on building my coaching business, but then also really taking these adventures a little more seriously. I got into climbing and various kind of expedition work that all culminated. I guess it was a little over a year ago now. We made a run at a peak called Alma de Blanc, which is just south of Everest, 22,500 feet. So we spent about a year training for that and doing a whole bunch of crazy, what we call a flash ascent, which we pre-acclimate in tents and stuff before we go. And then we go up to elevation and do our final acclimation. And then we made a run. We did not summit, but we made it to about 21,500 feet.
Wow.
And pulled off the mountain at that point. So, so I've done all sorts of crazy things, but, it's not only a place for me to kind of push myself and have these experiences. It's also just this place of kind of grounding and centering that I've always kind of gone to whenever I need. And it's kind of part of a general kind of ritual and practice that I have. So it's been interesting. And with the new business that you mentioned, Wilder, really kind of integrating those things. So I have a business partner, and we're focused on doing kind of the leadership and team development work, strategy work that I do, but now doing it in pretty amazing, epic outdoor settings. So whether it's national parks or just beautiful locations around the world where we can do the work, but really kind of get the benefit of perspective of kind of being in a different kind of container and having that connection to the outdoors and actually using the outdoors to actually go out and have experiences is super cool, right? It's just super exciting for me and the work that we've done and how this is coming together. So yeah, it's exciting. The last 5 years particularly has been exciting to integrate those things. So it's a little background. Happy to dig into any of those that you want to get more insight on.
Hey, Bruce, I'm really happy to have you here. And, we've met a couple of times, and I am just really impressed with the quality of mind and heart mind that you bring just in your field, like the field that you create. And I have no doubt that you are an absolutely superb coach. I'm also really impressed with the ventures that you've created, the career that you've had. So I'm just really interested to hear about what makes you tick, what has motivated you, what has inspired you and informed the different decisions that you've made in your life. So I'd love to, start off with what you've done. A lot of things, and you've got some recent ventures that are, coming to fruition right now. When do you know that a venture, it's time to move on and go in a different direction?
Um, it's one of those things. It's probably about 3 months after I should have moved on. Like there's a certain amount of, you got to know it after the fact. It's tough to see it coming sometimes. And my life has had a series of, I'll call them pivots, right? And sometimes, thought through and strategized and planned, sometimes forced upon me, and kind of figuring out how do I use this as an opportunity. But I think I've always enjoyed the idea of adventure, right? Like, and adventures could be, outdoors on mountains. It could be taking on a new business. It could be, a new relationship. It could be, just having some new experience. I always find that that's where I learn about myself, right? I get insights around who I am and how I'm wired and how I think, and they're always kind of insightful. And then honestly, like I learn about the world, right? You learn about people, you learn about environments, you learn about culture, society, and sometimes they're harder lessons to learn, but they're always fascinating lessons. And so I guess I've always seen, whether it's the business side or the outdoors side, as where can I find an edge, and where can I find some experience to have that's going to teach me something, help me learn a little bit about myself or the world.
So can I infer from that perhaps when that sense of adventure is no longer there, might be one of those early signs that it's time to develop something new?
Yeah, it's usually I feel a little tapped, right? Like I feel like I have kind of learned something, and there's 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 not something that's kind of I'm grappling with at that point. And I know that that's probably a good indicator that I need to transition out. So like when I sold my company, was very much of that, feeling like I'd spent a decade growing that. We scaled it, had a lot of huge wins. And then at some point I'm like, I'm not learning anything anymore, right? Like I'm kind of doing the same things. It's feeling very routine. I'm kind of checking out at some level, right, in terms of my engagement in it. Like I said, those, sometimes it's like, okay, I probably should have done that 6 months ago, but that feeling of moving on. And I think the interesting thing is, sometimes there's a very strong sense of, okay, what do I want to do next? Like, what's the pull into the next thing? I think the harder ones and some of the bigger ones have been when there hasn't been that pull. You kind of have to just trust the universe a little bit. You have to say, hey, look, I realize this is no longer my calling, or this is no longer engaging me in the way that I want to be engaged in the world. And I'm not sure what's next, but I'm going to just kind of lean into uncertainty and trust myself, trust the universe, trust, kind of possibility, and things will be revealed. And sometimes you just need to create that space. Sometimes you need to just open up that field a little bit for that new thing to come in. Which can be scary, but it's also thrilling, right? There's the fine line between those two sensations.
I think there's an interesting analogy with climbing mountains. And by the way, did you say you only got to 21,000?
Yeah.
Like that? I mean, that's amazing. But to me, in business, is a lot of it's like climbing a mountain. You start at the bottom, you work your way up, you have help along the way, and at some point you reach the peak, the pinnacle, and then it's like, okay, what do I do now? Do I go down the other side? Do I go to another mountain? So I'd love to hear about how your love of the outdoors and climbing has influenced your business career.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly having done some pretty epic outdoor adventures, I think two things that come to mind. One is just that feeling of uncertainty, the feeling being comfortable with uncertainty, or being comfortable with, hey, look, we have some parameters around this, but there are things that are going to happen that we need to figure out as we go. And that's part of the fun, right? Like you can be prepared for anything and not know exactly what's going to happen and have to deal with things in the moment. And I think that's been hugely helpful in business, right? Like you can have the best plan in the world, the best strategy in the world, the best intentions, but you get in there, things are going to come up, and you have to figure out how to deal with the situation, how to collect information, how to kind of look at the options, how to, decision making, right? And outdoor environments, like you run into these situations, right? And, sometimes they're, just kind of tactical, like, okay, what do we do next? Sometimes they become quite serious. Like outcomes can be, dealing with severe injury or, worse, if you don't really think through the situation and kind of assess things. That happens in business all the time. I think the other thing is just realizing how much you can do, like how much you can kind of push yourself.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's good, right? Sometimes that's needed and useful. Sometimes it's not. I've certainly been in business situations where we're like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have bothered doing that. Yeah, like we got through it and we pushed really hard and we figured it out, but probably wasn't the best strategy. Like we probably brute forced the situation more than we should have. So I
Mhm.
think understanding kind of that balance, or understanding, okay, those are options, and I know I can push myself in different ways, and I can tolerate a lot of discomfort if I need to in different times, but do I need to, right? And so it's a lot of that knowing you can, but then knowing whether you should or should not.
Mhm.
That's powerful stuff. I've got a question too about your coaching. How do you frame it? I'm curious. What is it you're listening for when you're talking to somebody at the beginning about their issues? And another way to pose that would be, where do you feel that you're especially able to help somebody?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've really zeroed in on strategic coaching for leadership teams. So I do some sort of executive one-on-one kind of leadership coaching with individuals and leaders, but my primary focus is teams, right? So I'm working with, usually senior leadership teams of companies. Sometimes they're, senior teams of big departments inside large companies, but we're looking at what are we trying to do, right? What is the strategy here? What are the outcomes that we want to achieve? What are the strategies we're going to use to execute it? And then what do we need to do as a team to be able to deliver on that? And it's a combination of kind of strategic clarity and process and goals and alignment, and then understanding, okay, well, what's the work to be done, and what resources, capabilities do we have as individuals and as a team to execute on that? So I kind of joke, half my job is business model, half my job is therapy, right? It's like what's in our way in terms of our performance as a team for achieving what we've set out to achieve on the business side. And sometimes that's communication, sometimes that's clarity of roles and responsibilities, sometimes it's interpersonal dynamics, right? Sometimes it's skill gaps. I love, well, one of the things I always do with teams, I do this pretty much with every session I run, but I start them with games, right?
Mm.
So I give them some kind of game. It could be as simple as, like, I do one where I give them a card deck and I shuffle the card deck and I time them how long it takes them to reassemble the card deck into a perfect order.
That's cool.
And I have them do it again and again and again.
Mm.
And just seeing them figure out, okay, what do we do? What do we want to try differently, experiment, and seeing the team dynamics. I mean, within
Mm.
20 minutes of that game, I have a pretty good understanding of what I'm dealing with from a team point of view. I get to see who leans in, who leans out, who takes control, who's thinking, who's analyzing situations, who's like figuring out the outcome, who just wants to get started. And in there is the essence of team performance, right? And so I love that, really kind of sorting through the dynamics and understanding, okay, how is this team interrelating and working together? And then how is it connected to the strategy we're trying to execute? And where do they have capabilities that are highly aligned to what we're trying to do? And where they have capabilities that may not serve us very well? And how do we tease those things apart and help them focus on things? I think the hardest one is typically where a team is really good at something and they love leaning on it, but it just doesn't serve the strategy they're trying to execute. And it's
Yeah.
really hard for a team
Mhm.
to not just flex a muscle that they're really good at flexing when it's not going to help them strategically.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you're kind of like a therapist as well as a business coach. I know that too, being a coach, there's an element there. And, from that standpoint, you only understand other people to the extent you understand yourself, right? So you have to understand yourself really deeply. And then as far as the professional coaching goes, you can only help people execute at the highest level, whether they're individuals or teams,
Yeah.
to the extent that you've really excelled, in your own business environments, which you obviously have. So I'm curious about this kind of the self-knowledge part of it and how you're able to help people understand themselves. That's kind of our game of Zen
Yeah.
is about that kind of the spiritual dimension, if you will. But the game is about really just it's about yourself.
Yeah.
It's the inner game of understanding yourself, what your gaps, what your unknowns are, what your weaknesses are, and what your kind of strategies are to make up for your weaknesses
Mhm.
instead of leaning into them, perhaps compensating for them. That whole kind of brilliant different game. How do you, coach for that game? Because clearly you're a great player of that game.
Yeah, I think part of me having been a great player, like having been through some of these crucibles, right? Like having founded a company, grown a company, sold a company, like knowing knowing what that's like intimately, right? Being 3 a.m. in the lawyer's office, right, trying to close a deal and having 2 hours left before the contract expires, and like knowing kind of the messiness of all that allows you to I get kind of combination of empathize and also give kind of a frame for leaders that are going through similar kind of situations. So I think that's one thing that I've always done pretty well, is being able to kind of tap into my own experiences, kind of good, bad, and ugly, and use them as a grounding to help give leaders context. Because a lot of times leaders, just have never been through this before, never been through that kind of situation before. And they're feeling very ungrounded and very alone and very kind of uncertain about things, and being able to give them some kind of, hey, look, we've done this before. Here's the situation I had. This is the experience that I've had. This is what I learned around that. Like, it just gives a certain amount of comfort and ability to then work through the situation they're going through. So I think that's one. I think, I've done a lot of work just getting clear with my own kind of thinking and understanding myself around these things, and understanding where my kind of tendencies, where those come from, where that's helpful, where that's not helpful, and being able to kind of apply it or realize where I'm going to apply it in different ways. I'm quite analytical. That's great in a lot of cases. In some cases, it's totally the wrong thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I just have to know that that's my muscle, right? That's my go-to strategy. And I need to be aware of, okay, this is my strategy. Do I use it? Do I not use it? In this case, if I'm not going to use it, what's the alternate strategy that I'm going to deploy here? And knowing that, and then working with leaders and helping them sort of see, okay, look, you've got a go-to strategy, a winning strategy. That's great a lot of times. In fact, it probably got you to where you are today. But you need to be more aware of when you go to apply it, particularly in kind of a reactionary way, and how can we catch that and then make a more conscious decision on, okay, is that really the right strategy now? Maybe we ought to try something else. Maybe we should step back from this thing, right? And helping them, I talk a lot about kind of creating some space, right? Like creating some space between, okay, this is what my reaction to something, and this is then my conscious decision on how I'm going to react. And, I think for most people, there's no space. And being able to create a little bit of light between those things is one of the things I find super helpful in working with leaders.
Love it.
I think what both of you guys also talking about is so interesting is the more that you know and understand yourself, the better you can lead and help your team and your company. And that could be through the practical advice about the team and the setup, or it could be through the therapy and just your personal stuff. Mm-hmm. So Bruce, how do you measure success over time? Like, how do you track how well the team is doing based on what you're implementing? And also, what do you do if you see things are stuck where they're not kind of getting it? How do you get it unstuck?
Yeah, so the first part, that's kind of one of the first things I do with the team is define success. Like, where do we want to go? What does success look like? I usually start with some kind of really kind of purpose, like exercise. Like, why are we even in this business? Who is it that we serve? Like, what is the intent or impact that we want to have in the world? And then break that down to a BHAG or some kind of big achievable, this is the peak that we're trying to reach over the next 10 years, and then we break that down into kind of more base camps. But I kind of use these climate analogies, but like we choose a summit and then we start figuring out what our base camps are, right? What is the route we're going to try first? But it's a team process, right? I find that one of the most important things to do in working with leadership teams is that has to be a team process by which you're getting alignment and getting buy-in to those goals. Because if you come in, CEO coming and say, this is what we're going to do, this is why I just need you to execute, you're not going to get the same kind of commitment, same kind of real attachment to the work to be done. And so I always work with the team to set their goal, have them set their goals. And I'll certainly give feedback and I'll give them kind of insight, make sure they're thinking about possibilities. But it's really the team job. That's part of the first process. Once we have that, then we can kind of use that to measure success. We can start setting up some milestones. What are the metrics that we're going to use to kind of define progress? Teams always get stuck, right? That's kind of just the nature of teams, right? It's the nature of the process. If they're not getting stuck, it probably means that we didn't choose a hard enough goal at some level, right? Like there is going to be that process. And a lot of that is, okay, realizing you're stuck. Sometimes one of the best things I can do as a coach is say, you are stuck. And let's like call it right now, because sometimes if they're just grinding away on something and not realizing, that can just chew up energy and get frustrating. And then, I'm a big fan of lean and, kind of this Socratic method. Like, okay, we start asking why, like what is going on here? Like, what is causing this? What's causing that? What's causing that? Getting down to kind of root cause analysis. Like I use this analogy as an architect. I said, just because you have water in the basement doesn't mean you have a crack in the foundation, right? Like it could be that your chimney flashing is off. In fact, it usually is because your chimney flashing is off, right? And it's trickling down the whole house and just pooling in the basement. But if you assume that the problem is actually in the basement, you're not going to get to the real issues. So having this kind of philosophy, some of it is philosophy, mindset, some of it is, tools and kind of practical techniques to get into sort of analyzing the problem, figuring out root cause, like in sort of systems to be able to kind of identify that. And once we have those, then you're talking about systemic change, right? And, really, how do we make this so that we're never really going to have this particular problem again, right? We're going to put in place a system that's going to avoid that root cause, or kind of solve that root problem, so that we can then move forward with more confidence.
Talking about this group work and these beautiful experiences that you guide people through, whether it's out in the wilderness or in the boardroom, it's well understood in the therapeutic profession that group work is actually exponentially more powerful for individuals than one-on-one work is, just because of the relatedness and the connection and the releasing the self-centered focus of the work. It really opens it up. And which is wonderful, but also it requires a really strong framework for that group work to happen, so that people don't, go off into their own trips and pull the rest of the group, along with them. So I can hear that you're providing that superb, group structure. And the power of the outdoor, I want to ask you just about that, because these wilderness retreats that you're doing, some of which are specifically focused on strategic leadership, some are focused on unplugging, some are focused on mindfulness. You've got a variety of different themes, I think, that you focus on in these. And it almost seems like, given the proper container, the experience just works by itself. Do you find that?
Yeah, there's a certain extent. I mean, there's a couple of facets. I mean, one is just nature, right? Like I find even just putting a group of individuals out in nature, the sort of the sensory experience, right? You now are kind of tapping into both types of stimulation that most people don't have on a regular basis, and often invoking senses that are not highly stimulated in other cases, right? So we start dealing with feeling of, air and temperature and the sun. You start having sort of smells and, right, this rich of whether it's, pine forest or the smell of the swamp or cut grass or, whatever kind of environment you're in. Like you have this sensory experience that most people don't get on a day-to-day basis, which causes all of this neuro kind of chemistry and sensory experiences, brain firing in different ways that just doesn't do on a regular basis, which then activates things. Now we can go in and start talking about strategy, or talking about leadership, or talking about the business problems. And you're just dealing with a very different kind of brain activity structure for individuals. So some of this is just individuals in nature is super powerful. Some of this is now you put a team working together at various levels. It could be as simple as just going on a hike together, but they have to start navigating. It's like, hey, I've got a trail. It's like, do we stay together? Do we spread out? Do we form small groups? Are we trying to, like, is everyone individual? Sometimes we put intention around that. Sometimes we leave it up to the group to kind of see what happens. In there is social interaction. They have to navigate these things, right? Now I have to start interacting with people that I work with on a regular basis, or we'll be working with together on a regular basis if it's a new team, and giving them sort of these tools or giving them an experience of having to negotiate themselves socially, right? Who's going to lead? Who's going to be backup? Like, does someone play sweep or not? Right? Like, what
Mhm.
it makes them grapple with these things, to the extent of like we put teams on ropes and we start putting them, giving them some exposure, and it's always fascinating to see who has the fear of heights, right? Like, and oftentimes the person who is, very confident in the office, will all of a sudden do a 180 on the mountain, and just actually kind of dealing with this whole exposure and, real sort of the perceived risk versus real risk. How do we tease that apart? Understanding risk mitigation when we get into the ropes and we talk about, where failure points are and perceived failure points and perceived redundancies. And like, it's fascinating to see them grapple with it. But then you give all of that stuff in the context of an exposure situation. Now all of my senses are firing, and I'm having to grapple with this thing, and I'm having to work with people. That can be an amazing crucible for team development.
It's fascinating. I think nature is the best place to think. I love trees and hikes and walks and, trails, and I do a lot of strategic thinking out there. So first of all, the website is discoverwilder.com. The things look so. I'd love to hear more specifics about the trips. Where do you go? What's the day, the day look like? And then how long do they last?
Yeah, so I primarily focus on the smaller leadership teams, YPO, EO forum groups. And it kind of depends on the group. Like one of my philosophies around this is understanding where the group is currently and what they want to achieve around this. So we have some groups that are, they want to go hard. Up at 5:30, we want to do a pre-breakfast sunrise summit. Then we're going to come down and do yoga, right? Like, it can be really focused activities, very physical, getting people into their body. They want to do more kind of personal work and pushing themselves. That's great. We've got agendas. We do sweat lodges, we do ice baths, right? Like, we can kind of do the highly experiential, intense things. Like I said, we can do things on ropes if people really want to get into kind of climbing or, achieve some kind of objective with the retreat from a physical point of view. We have other groups that, we want to create this amazing location. We want to have, meditation time. Like, it's really about calming and getting centered and more kind of internal exploration, both as individuals and a group. So it really kind of depends on what the group wants to achieve. Our three main goals are to create sort of an epic experience. Like, we want to have a really memorable experience. We want people to come out of this and say, I've never really felt or done something like this in terms of a location, in terms of an activity, in terms of what they saw or felt or tasted or touched, right? Like, we want to create a memorable experience. We want to do important work. Like, we want to find the real issues, right? We've all sorts of kind of agendas and things that we can tap into, but it comes down to what is, I talk about entering the danger, right? Like, we want to enter the danger with the group. Like, what is that thing that they've been afraid to tackle, they've been skirting around, they've been avoiding, maybe they haven't really realized. A lot of my job is helping them figure out what that thing is. I would rather tackle one really important issue really deeply on a retreat than 10 issues at a surface level. So how do we really kind of find that thing? And sometimes it's emergent, right? We'll start with some exercises, or we'll have a certain agenda. Halfway through the first morning, something can come up and be like, okay, we're scrapping everything, and now we're focused on this for the rest of the time, right? So it's finding that really kind of the crux, the thing that's really kind of holding the team back. And the other thing we want to provide is a really, well-designed sort of full service. Like, we want to take care of everything, right? Like, I think a lot of the struggle that particularly leadership teams and forum groups and things like that they're busy, right? Like, they don't have time to really kind of plan all the details and figure this stuff out. So a lot of what we do as a group is really take care of that stuff. We find the right locations. We know all the little things that make a really amazing experience. And being able to get them there with them not having to do a whole lot of work and not having to be stressed about it, right? So it's just kind of this real turnkey solution. Having been part of EO for many years and having run many retreats myself, they're a pain in the ass. If you're the retreat planner, like that is the worst retreat you've ever had, is when you're the retreat planner, because you're just sitting there stressed all the time.
Yeah.
You're trying to manage. You can't participate. You're trying to run it.
It does sound fun though, too.
Yeah.
To go on it,
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, this is my next lifestyle like upgrade is doing all the work that I've done in conference rooms across the world to now do them in just beautiful equitable locations and outside. So that's my idea.
Well, it really is coming to life, and as you talk about this more, Bruce, I'm more appreciative of the power of these experiences that you've created and the work that you do. It's integrating the external kind of skills development, you might say, and situational wisdom that you're developing. There's the relational part of it with the teamwork, and then there's the internal skills that are being built and the self-knowledge, and it's all integrated into these incredibly intense, immersive, fun, adventurous, but very empowering experiences. I wanted to ask you about this one of these kind of internal qualities, in a sense, and you've talked about neuroplasticity. I don't know if you used that word, but you talked about opening channels with the senses, right? And you've been in the cannabis industry. I think you're doing a little something with psilocybin.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to invite you to speak about that, say formal protocols for, and just to say it, I myself, meditation is my primary kind of neuroplasticity empowerment modality. You could say that, but I'm also working with psilocybin as well, with my clients. So I wanted to invite you to talk about how you may be integrating those modalities in a more formal protocol sense into the work you're doing.
Yeah. So I run a separate podcast called Psychedelic Invest, and we cover the psychedelic industry really kind of from a business investor point of view. But I've had a chance to really get to know several of the really kind of interesting up and coming groups that are working with psychedelics in various format, both for kind of mental health conditions, but also for kind of for performance and things like that. So it's a fascinating space. I've been involved in the space probably 7 or 8 years now, and my personal experience is fascinating in that it's both kind of this therapeutic kind of healing, like giving you some perspective and the ability to kind of soften things so you can get into kind of personal challenges and things like that. So there's this kind of neuroplasticity or ability to work through something that you potentially are resistant to in other ways, right? That's sort of one of the options or one of the capabilities of psychedelics. But there's also this generative side of it, which is like really helping you see new and different connections. And sometimes those are, kind of abstract or conceptual. It's like, oh, it's kind of like I should really integrate this strategic work I'm doing with the love of the outdoors, right? Like that there's a conceptual idea down to really practical things. Like I've had experiences where like I'm grappling with some specific challenge, and like a specific solution kind of presents itself either as part of or immediately after these experiences, which, on one hand you look at and you're like, oh, well, obviously I should do that. But it wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious until you've had this kind of experience. So yeah, I think and I guess my general feeling is psychedelics are one modality to have these kind of experiences, whether it's meditation, breath work, right? Other things that kind of change your, whether it's, how your kind of brain is firing or kind of the synapses and the connections and the patterns that you have, anything that can kind of soften or disrupt that a little bit to get you thinking in different ways, I find is super powerful. Oftentimes combining these things and sort of making a combination will, can create that experience, can accelerate that experience, maybe change the nature of that experience. And I mean, we can go down the list of all the psychedelics out there, and they're all different and they work different ways and they have different kind of experiences. They're all tools, right? They're a tool that you can use in different ways. It's interesting. I've, I kept these worlds very separate, right, for a long time, right? Having my kind of coaching and strategy and leadership world, my outdoor world, my, knowledge and use of psychedelics and kind of experiences there. A lot of what's happening for me is this stuff is all kind of coming together. And the more leaders that I work with, that as they really realize that a lot of their leadership challenges and potential are really wrapped up in their own kind of thinking and understanding, and even just how they see themselves in the world, or how they see themselves as part of the universe, like they realize that there's work to do there, or there's opportunities. And I don't even want to present it as like it's a problem you've got to fix. It's a way of seeing yourself and the world that, when you're able to kind of move up and shift and look at it, creates opportunities, right? And I think in there, there's just possibilities, right? It creates the possibilities for leaders to kind of learn and try things, right? And sometimes there's obvious fits. Sometimes there's kind of these immediate solutions, right? It's like, oh, I solved this problem. Sometimes it's like, wow, this is really interesting. I have a whole bunch of new perspectives. I don't know when and how that's going to apply, but it's resourcing me. It's resourcing me in terms of what I'm able to think about, what I'm able to kind of contemplate, maybe when I'm not as caught up in terms of a limiting kind of belief or a limiting kind of position that I'm putting myself in. Sometimes that can take months or even years where that plays out in different ways.
I think it's super interesting what's happening, though. It's a lot more acceptable for executives, especially, to talk about this. And I'm sure Steve Jobs was famous for psychedelics, and there's all sorts of stories about Elon Musk these days and things that he's up to. And I think it's super interesting on the corporate level how you learn more about yourself. My experiences with psychedelics, I learn a lot about myself, but when I'm doing them with other people, I have a deeper connection in some way. And so I could just picture being out there like in the wilderness and having a team and having some mushrooms there and really coming out of it with a much more cohesive, new ideas firing, all sorts of ways. And I think that we're really at the beginning of that. And I think you have that experience being, a CEO, but also being experienced in cannabis and psychedelics, where you can kind of bring it all together. I guess my question is, how are a lot of these folks like down with that right now, or is it still, no go?
I would say, there's certainly groups that I've worked with that have personal experiences with it that we talk about as part of the work that we do. I have a couple of cannabis companies that are their general practice is to kind of consume as part of their more kind of day-to-day business stuff, and for various reasons or various possibilities, I think is a little more acceptable in cannabis, or it's like prevalent in cannabis. I think the psychedelic side, we're still kind of sorting through things. I definitely have some companies that, it's a very big part of their individual lives, and to some extent they're doing it, or they have combined or group experiences around it. I have yet to have a team that's like, okay, we want to do a 3-day strategy intensive, and we're gonna, weave in, psychedelic use as part of it. I think it would be amazing. But I think it's still there's still enough hesitation, both in terms of we're still kind of figuring out how a lot of these medicines work, right? So not having complete knowledge of exactly, how is it going to affect the individuals? How is it going to affect the team? What are the best protocols around it? And also just, I think we're still dealing with enough stigma or at least uncertainty on how this is going to come across from a public point of view, social point of view. That said, it's changing dramatically. 5 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Mm-hmm. It's really been in the last couple of years where this is now people understand, okay, there's something here, right? We're still sorting it out. We're still figuring it out, but there's definitely something here. In terms of protocols, I'm like, people can have amazing experiences, and like I'm an adventurer, right? So like, I'm all for like, hey, let's look, what are the different modalities out here? What are the different medicines? How we can kind of learn from them. I'm also a big believer in like, they're just tools, right? Like there's other ways to do this work, and you have to be reasonably comfortable going into it. Like the last thing I would want to do is have someone who is not really comfortable or doesn't feel grounded enough to kind of have these experiences, get into one of these experiences and then not have a good experience, right? So much of this is kind of prepping and having the right setting and right, like feeling comfortable going in is going to have a huge impact on the quality and the value that you get out of an experience. Going into it uncertain and stressed and not feeling prepared generally is not going to lead to great outcomes. So, it's like I said, there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of work, and there's going to be groups that are more interested and on edge and, willing to kind of be adventurers. And those other groups that are going to be like, yeah, we're going to wait and see, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
I so appreciate your perspective on this, Bruce. And, like you, I'm on the cutting edge in a sense of kind of integrating this into cultures where it's been a little bit not understood so much, and we're learning so much. But every conversation that happens is a part of the, emergence and the cultural shift. So this one included.
Yeah.
And, those of our listeners who are listening here can learn more, about the different capacities and modalities available. I've got one more question for you, and this is I'm going to step up and ask you about just your view of life, your view of the country, your view of the world. Are you optimistic? And you're a high level, high functioning business leader, strategist. You're working with movers and shakers. You're a mover and shaker yourself. So from your perspective, are you optimistic about the world? What are the good things that are happening that you can help with and that we can help with?
Ooh, interesting one. I would say my general, I'm kind of an optimistic realist, I guess I would say. I mean, look, the world is the world and people are people. And that's, I don't think that there's always going to be a certain amount of complexity and a certain amount of challenge in living life. Life has suffering, right? Like, I think it is that there is kind of a, what was that? I can't remember the quote. There's somebody who said like the idea that life should be happy is a construct, right? Like that is a, that's someone's opinion, right? There's nothing, universally proven or universally absolute about life should be happy. That said, I mean, there's a certain like embracing of the challenge of life is life, right? And it's working through those things that I think is what life is about, right? And so, I mean, I guess I have a little bit of a philosophy of, at the end of the day, life is a bit of a game, right? And you have to decide how you want to play the game. And if you like not taking life too seriously, I find as helps create a little levity or a little ability to then make some choices and not get too wrapped up in things. So I think there's probably some philosophy there. I mean, in terms of the world overall at this point, I mean, I certainly, one of the reasons I do what I do is I believe that cultivating leadership at all levels, personal leadership, community leadership, social leadership, business leadership, like all those things are just good things. Like all that stuff is going to help the world be better in different ways. And I just, that's kind of why I do what I do. Right. And I do it because I love it, but I do it because I do think that, this kind of awareness and leadership skills and being able to navigate things successfully and in a very open, conscious way, it just helps the world in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question, but
it did. Beautiful.
Oh yeah. Really great answer. And I really appreciate what you do. And both of you guys actually, because really the more people just need to be open to the coaching and the mentorship and, the adventure that you provide and even the psychedelics, like the more that you open to that, the more you can change. And yeah, it is a game. Like we call it the game of Zen, you call it the game of nature, whatever it is. It's like we have to approach it like that. But also it's important to understand that there is suffering. And why do, we talk a lot on this podcast about the noble truths and what causes suffering and how do I get out of it? And you're providing people with great tools. So it's really awesome. And we could keep going and maybe we need to have you on again, Bruce. But
anytime.
In the interest of time, tell us about how can we reach you? How can we follow you and get in touch?
Yeah. So for me, my website, eckfeldt.com has kind of all of my personal stuff and coaching stuff that I do. Discover Wilder is the work that I do with retreats and getting people outside and kind of helping them use nature as a tool for like personal development, leadership development. Those are the best links. From there, you can look at my Inc. articles, the other podcasts that I run and things like that. So yeah, would love people to check those out and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you. We really appreciate you being on today. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay. And so we, as usual, we'd ask you to subscribe and share the Game of Zen podcast with your friends. And thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode.
Thank Thank you for joining us on this exploration into Zen Buddhism and its transformative influence on work and life. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. May your journey be one of continuous growth and mindful living. From all of us here at Game of Zen, wishing you peace and prosperity on your path ahead.